Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about 9 things that feel easier now that I've been living in France for over 6 years. Last week I did a video on 5 things that still feel hard after 6 years, and so this is the inverse of that. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Patricia Brooks, and over 6 years ago, I decided that I was going to leave my job, get on a plane, and move to the south of France. And I have been here ever since, and it's been incredible. Now I help women like me who were aching to make a move abroad, but who lack the confidence or courage to make the move on their own. I help them to find that confidence and courage. And on this channel, I talk about life in France, moving abroad, and finding the confidence and courage to live life on your terms. So if that sounds interesting to you, be sure to subscribe. Now, today I've got the inverse of the video I did last week, and I'm going to jump right in. Now, these are broken down into categories, and the first category is communication. So the first thing that is easier after living in France for 6 years is writing emails and text messages and even dating profiles in French. When I first moved here, there were occasions when I needed to communicate in written French, and that was not a skill that I had developed very well. And so as a consequence, when I sat down to write an email, I dreaded it. And I wrote it, and it took me forever to write the simplest email. And now when I sit down to write an email or text message or even create that dating profile, that can be hard even in your mother tongue, it feels like second nature. I sit down, I write it, I proofread it, and I seldom, if ever, now put it through Google Translate because I feel confident in my ability to communicate in written French. That feels so much easier, and that feels amazing. Number 2, in the area of communication is making phone calls. Phone calls are more challenging than face-to-face communication because you don't have those visual cues. And so when you don't necessarily have such a good command of a language, picking up the phone and calling somebody and asking for what you need is daunting. And in the beginning, I dreaded that as well. But now I am able to communicate very effectively by phone, and I don't hesitate anymore to pick up the phone and make the call. I remember in November of 2019, I was getting ready to buy a car, and I needed to know if I could get car insurance with a Virginia driver's license. I hadn't yet transferred my Virginia driver's license to a French one. And so I had asked a friend who I was having lunch with if he would call the insurance agent for me and ask that question. Well, when he called, he didn't ask to speak to the insurance agent directly, and so just got the receptionist who didn't really know or gave a half-hearted answer. And so when I left lunch and I came back to my village, I was really frustrated. I got on the bus, and that 40-minute bus ride home, I was stewing. I'm like, I'm no closer. And I thought to myself, Patricia, when you get home, just call the insurance agent yourself. And I did. And we had a conversation all in French about insurance. And I left that conversation with the information I needed. And that was the moment when I called myself fluent, because I had this conversation on a subject that's not the most simple over the phone. And so that was a shift for me. Now I pick up the phone and I have conversations all of the time. And sometimes when I get unwanted spam calls, I will answer the call just so that I can have the conversation and strengthen my French speaking muscles just a little bit more. So those are 2 things that are easier after 6 years here in France. So next on the list is administrative matters. Yes, there are a couple of administrative matters that are easier now that I've been here in France. When I first got here, the end of my first year, my friend Jordi, he was telling me, yeah, getting set up in the system is challenging, but once you're in, you're good. And I now understand what he was talking about there. So the first one is banking. Banking is easier for me now. In the beginning, in my first year, I was able to get a bank account, but I had to have my landlord vouch for me. That meant that he had to photocopy his carte d'identité, his identity card, so that I could put that in my dossier for the bank. And I also had the receptionist at the language school I was attending call over to the bank and schedule that appointment for me. So I really needed some hand-holding to get that done. And that was fine. And then that first year, I had to, every time I deposited money into my bank account that I had withdrawn from my US bank account from an ATM, I had to give a copy of that receipt for the money I had withdrawn from my US bank account that coincided or corresponded with what I had deposited in my French account. And that felt like a hassle, right? That felt hard. But I did it because that was what was required. Then I moved to Surrey, right, from Perpignan, and I had opened my bank account in Perpignan. And the banks here are a little bit different from in the United States, even though it's the same bank. My account is with Perpignan, right? And so some things I need to do, I need to go to Perpignan or contact my banker in Perpignan and have them reach out to the bank in Surrey. So that felt like a hassle, especially in the beginning, because when I moved to Surrey and I went in to deal with my bank account, the guy there said, "Oh, this bank account isn't a real bank account." And I was really offended by that. I was like, "What do you mean it's not a real bank account? You opened it. It's here." He's like, "Yeah, but you're not depositing money every week. And so it's not a real bank account." And so that felt hard too, that not being recognized or valued as a bank customer. So, but now banking is easier because when I started my business here in France, I opened a business bank account. And that got me respect. That also got me the ability to get a French cell phone plan. Now, I struggle to get a cell phone plan on my own because I did not have a European Union passport. And Orange said that I needed to make a $250 deposit, non-interest bearing deposit, so that then I could have this cell phone plan. And so I said, "Yeah, no, I'm not doing that." And I, month by month, would pay for a card to put minutes and data on my cell phone plan, right? And that felt hard. It felt like I was temporary here, and that didn't feel good. But now banking feels easier because I have that business bank account that got me the respect that I deserved here, right? So much easier. So that's the first thing administrative-wise that's easier. The second thing is visas. Now, my first few years here, I had a visitor visa, good for 1 year. And toward the end of each year, I would have to apply for a new visa and prove all over again that I still qualified. And so after the first year, not a big deal. But then in the second year, oh yeah, I got to do that again. And in the third year, I got to do that again. And so that started to feel hard to prove my ability to stay in a country I wanted to stay in. That was not something I wanted to do every year. And that felt hard. But once I decided to start my business here and get a Profession Liberale visa, I don't have to renew every year. So after the first year, I got the Profession Liberale visa. That was good for 1 year initially. I did have to renew after the first year. But I was then approved for a multi-year visa, which means now I don't have to renew for another 2 years. I was good for 4 years. Now I don't have to renew for another 2 years. And that feels easy, right? To not have to pull the paperwork together, to not have to show that I'm earning enough money each year. That feels easier, right? So there are some things administratively that feel easier here in France now that I have been here for 6 years. All right. So we've talked about communication, talked about administration. Now I'm going to get into what feels easier to me on the level of physical comfort. All right. When I say physical comfort, I mean just feeling good as I'm doing something. All right. So number 5 has to do with going to the pharmacy. I feel so much more at ease going into a pharmacy for a number of reasons. First, initially, in the first couple of years of my life here in France, I did not have the carte vitale, which is the health insurance card. And so every time I went into a pharmacy to get my prescription filled, that was the first question they had. Give us your carte vitale. And I didn't have one. And they would look at me like I had 2 heads. Like, what do you mean you don't have one? Everybody has one. And that put me on the defensive. So that was one reason I didn't like going into the pharmacy. I didn't feel comfortable because I was going to get this question. It was going to raise eyebrows, and it didn't make me feel comfortable. Another reason it was not so comfortable to go into a pharmacy was because here in France, even over-the-counter drugs, you have to go to a pharmacy to get, and to a pharmacist to ask for, right? Because it's behind the counter, but it's over the counter. And so if you're experiencing something, maybe you have a bout of diarrhea or something like that, you need to go up to the pharmacist or the pharmacist technician and describe what's going on, and they're diagnose you and bring a couple of medicines and explain what they do so that you can, get your medicine and go on your way. And so initially there was the communication issue, but then also the discomfort of just having to explain what's going on in my body that I need help with was a little bit embarrassing. And so that was not something I felt comfortable. Now it's just the way it is. I can communicate better, and I have one pharmacy I go to now. I know them, they know me, and so there is a level of comfort there as well. So it feels so much easier and less stressful to go to the pharmacy. Number 6 is going to the store. Now, when I first moved here and I went to a store, it made me think back to when I was 7 or 8 years old and I first started going to the store with my good friend Connie, and we went alone. And when we went, we had a little bit of money and we could pick whatever we wanted out, but then we'd have to go to the checkout. And it was like being a grown-up for the first time and counting the money that they asked for and making sure it was right. All of that was a little bit intimidating initially. And so here in France, doing that for the first time with different currency felt a little bit like that. In addition to that, there are different items in the grocery store, and I didn't know where things were. Certain things you can't find. The eggs are not refrigerated. The milk's not refrigerated. So just finding my way around just was a little bit different. And it took me so much longer to go to the grocery store than it did when I was in the States because of all of that and because of the different products and needing to read labels and looking it up on my phone, some things up on my phone to make sure, is this what I'm looking for? That feels so much easier now because I know so many more items that are in the grocery store. I know my grocery store. I know how to go to checkout. And, one of the things that tripped me up initially was there are some grocery stores here that you have to weigh your produce in the produce section, right? So one time I didn't do that, where the first time I went to one store that required that, I didn't do that. And I got to check out and they started ringing everything out. And then they got to my produce and they're looking on my bags of produce for the label, which there was none because I didn't know I needed to weigh the item. So they said, you got to weigh these. And so they gave me like 5 or 6 bags of produce, and I had to go back to the produce section, pass all the people who were in line behind me who were going to be waiting and inconvenienced to weigh these things. And I didn't know. And it was a little bit embarrassing. So, after having had that experience, I now know to look in the produce section to see if there are scales to weigh. And I'm so much more relaxed about packing up my bags in a manner that's not rushed, because that is something that I have gained here. I've gained the ability to go through checkout, to feel a little bit more comfortable when people are closer to me with the personal space. But then also as I'm packing my bags and paying, I'm not rushing as I would in the United States because things are a little bit slower and people in front of me are taking their time. I'm going to take my time as well. So going to the grocery store is another thing where I feel physically more comfortable doing now after 6 years. Another thing that I'm physically more comfortable doing is saying no. In my book, Live a Bold Life, there's a chapter called No is Not a Bad Word. And I wrote that chapter because something that I experienced during my first year in France gave me pause about saying no to them. And it felt hard, but saying no felt like the right thing. And it took me a while to get to the no, but I did. Now, saying no when something doesn't suit me or is not in alignment with my values is so much quicker. There's far, far, far less guilt about doing it. And, I feel more comfortable saying no. Recently, somebody had asked me if I would dog sit for them. I dog sit for a friend of theirs, and they had given my name and information to this person saying, oh, she might be interested, but we're not sure, but reach out to her. And so I got this message, and they warned me. I got this message saying, oh, will you be able to dog sit for us next weekend? And when I got the message, when I saw it immediately, I thought, no, I don't want to do that. But I thought, oh, maybe I should do it. Maybe it'll be a good experience. Maybe they can't find anybody else. And within an hour's time, I said, no, Patricia, send a message saying no. And I got to that by starting the message out by saying, well, I can do it if this is the case, and if this is the case, and if this is the case. And I started to realize I was putting all these conditions in place because I didn't want to do it. And I was trying to hem and haw to say no. And so I erased what I had started to write. And I said, no, I no longer accept new clients to dog sit for. And that was it, because there was really not a whole lot in it for me. They lived in the same town that the people I dog sit for already live in. So it's not like I was going to be experiencing a new town or village. I don't know their dog and how hard their dog would be. And it's just 25 minutes down the road. So it's not like a vacation for me, and I would still have to work. I don't know what their internet speeds are like. It just felt hard. And so just this morning, I decided I was going to go to a play that is the weekend that I would be dog sitting. And so that's another reason. If I say yes to something that I don't want to do, that means I'm going to have to say no, or might need to say no to something that I really want to do. That opportunity cost is important as well. So I can say no so much more easily now. And I'm not really sure where that comes from. I know this whole experience of living in a foreign country has been a personal growth program of sorts for me. And I think just the experiences I've had and learning to do things that feel in alignment with my values and that feel the way I want to feel living in this country have gone to the forefront of my mind now. And the no feels easier than saying yes to something I don't want now. Whereas before, saying no felt harder. So definitely a big shift there. Number eight. Number eight is an interesting one. So here in France, if you go to a dinner at somebody's house or maybe a lunch on a Sunday afternoon, you might be around that dinner table for hours. And when I first got here and was invited to dinner or lunch at friends' houses, and spending that much amount of time around the table was hard for me on a number of different levels. One was not something I was accustomed to doing. But the second reason was having conversations in French for 2.5 or 3.5 hours was tiring. Right? You're learning a new language. When you're communicating in a new language, you have to focus and concentrate so much. And that takes a lot of energy. And so after, an hour and a half, I started to get tired. It was exhausting. And at the end of it, I'd leave and I'd be like, oh, I'm so tired. Well, 3 weeks ago, I had 3 French friends over for lunch. They came by at 12:15 and they stayed until about 4:15 or 4:30. And we spoke entirely in French. And it was a very, very enjoyable experience for me. Not like it was in years 1 or 2 when I'd go and eat a meal at somebody's house thinking, oh, when is this going to be over? It was very, very enjoyable. So that is something that feels easier now, having lived in France for 6 years. And then finally, number 9 is driving. I feel so much more physically comfortable driving here in France. In 2019, I decided to get that car because it would just be more convenient living in a smaller village outside of Perpignan, right? It just made sense. And so I did. And then when I got the car, I realized I wasn't driving it as much as I thought I would because, well, it was stressful to drive on French roads. It was stressful because I'm driving in a foreign country, but also because the roads are narrower here and some of the roads are windy mountain roads. And that just felt harder. Here, there are a ton of roundabouts or circles. And I wasn't accustomed to driving with circles on the roads everywhere, every few feet, it seems like. And so, you got to jump in, you got to jump out. It was a stressful situation. Now I'm comfortable doing the circles. But in the beginning, that felt hard. Another thing that felt hard about driving was motorcycles. Now, motorcycles weave in and out, and, cars pull a little bit over to the side as they continue to drive to allow them, some space to go by. Well, in the beginning, I was not anticipating a motorcyclist to be right up on my back or right beside me, so quickly. Sometimes you don't see them in your side view mirror, and then all of a sudden they're there. And it's startling and it's scary. And it, made me say, oh, I got to get over. Now I anticipate that that's going to be the case. And I'm not so startled anymore. Time and practice have made this easier for me, made this feel less stressful. And I feel more comfortable behind the wheel here in France. There are a couple of other things that make driving in France a little bit challenging. Parking spaces are tiny. The lot I have for my building here, the configuration is a nightmare, but I've gotten adjusted to how to get in and out, even when somebody seems to have boxed me in. Not as stressful as it was before. I see somebody parked in the spot that blocks me in. I know that I can get out, and so I am not so stressed about that. And the other thing that made driving on French roads challenging for me was that there are oftentimes these cement obstructions in the middle of the road, or sometimes plastic cone-like things that are meant to, when you're making a left-hand turn, they're meant to make sure that you aren't cutting the corner, that you're swinging wide left. Well, one day early on in my driving experience here in France, I was making this left turn on a road that I was not familiar with, and cars were coming from the left and the right. And so I'm looking left, I'm looking right, I'm looking at the roads, I'm looking at the cars. I'm not looking down at this impediment in the middle of the road. And so finally I see an opportunity to go out, and I turn and I cut it a little bit short so that I can get out there. And I drive over this cement barrier, and I hear the scraping underneath my car. And I think, oh, I hope I didn't tear up the bottom of my car. And, I kept on driving and praying, and I was okay, but I wasn't anticipating having this cement barrier there. Another time, making a left turn as well, there was this cone-like structure that gives way, and same situation. And I hit the side of that, and it bounced back, but it was jarring. So things like that made it more difficult for me to drive in France, or more stressful to drive in France, and not really feel so comfortable physically. But now, after, I guess, 5 years, close to 5 years of driving in France, that feels so much easier. All right. Now, I wanted to share this video with you because I had done that 5 things that feel hard still after 6 years. And I wanted to give you the light at the end of the tunnel that, while there are some things that still feel hard, there are a number of things that feel easier and that time and experience help with getting through to the other side of. All right. So which one of these surprises you the most? Let me know in the comments. Now, you may have this dream of moving abroad and maybe feel a little bit intimidated about all of the things that will be hard for the first year, the second year, maybe even the 4th year. And you're wondering if it's really worth it, if you have the mettle to make it happen and thrive in a new country. If that's the case and you are struggling to see if it's really going to work for you, I'd love to have a conversation to see where you are in your process, what things you're concerned about, and if our working together could help you get there sooner. Because I help people who are ready to make a move abroad and who want to build the skills to help them thrive there so that they can enjoy their lives in their new country in a way that feels good, so that they can feel great physically doing the things that they want to do in their dream country. If that sounds like you, be sure to click the link in the description or go to thecouragecatalyst.com/future expat and schedule some time with me so that we can delve into that. All right. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now.